Welcome back, everyone.
It's great to be back.
We're diving deep today into the Harding and Coolidge presidencies.
Yeah, the 1920s.
They
With
had
these back-to-back presidencies.
a whole decade really shaped by these two Republicans.
It's fascinating.
It is, yeah.
It's this really interesting mix of...
There's a big economic boom, of course.
Right, and then scandal.
Oh, yeah, and can't forget the social change.
Kind of brewing under the
There's
surface.
a lot going on.
We'll get to unpack their policies.
And how all this fits into the bigger picture of the Roaring Twenties.
Exactly, and we'll even see.
How different groups were affected by these policies.
Yeah, so we're talking a cabinet member going to jail.
A scandal involving a place called Teapot Dome.
Intrigued.
Hi,
Let's dive in.
Let's do it.
So first up,
Warren G. Harding.
Warren G. Harding, elected in 1920.
Yep.
He campaigned on this idea of a return to normalcy.
Ooh.
What was he tapping into there?
Well, picture this.
Huh?
America after World War I,
Uh-huh.
exhausted,
Right.
dealing with social unrest. Yeah,
Yearning for stability.
makes sense.
So Harding basically comes in and says, let's get back to business.
Uh-huh.
Let's make some money, less government, more freedom.
More freedom for businesses.
Right. Let businesses do their thing.
So hands-off approach.
Exactly.
And did this hands-off approach influence the Roaring Twenties?
This is where it gets interesting.
Oh.
This idea planted the seeds for that incredible economic growth.
Of the Roaring Twenties.
Yep. But you could also argue it planted the seeds for the Great Depression that followed.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's complicated.
So two sides of the same coin.
Sort of.
What about the world stage?
Okay, so...
Harding was all about isolationism, right? High tariffs to protect American businesses.
Right.
Rejecting the League of Nations.
Uh-huh.
Why this inward turn?
Well, think about it.
Okay.
The war was devastating.
Uh-huh.
Lives lost, money spent. It was a lot.
Right.
Many Americans felt
Yeah.
that the country needed to focus on rebuilding and avoiding any more foreign issues.
Stay out of it.
Exactly.
So how did this return to normalcy?
How did it actually play out?
Yeah, how did it look in terms of policies?
Right.
Give me the specifics.
Okay, so think tax cuts
Tax cuts for?
for the wealthy,
Okay.
slashing regulations.
Fewer rules?
Yep.
Okay.
Boosting those tariffs.
Higher tariffs.
Even higher, yeah.
What was the overall goal?
It was all about keeping labor costs down.
Which businesses love?
Oh, yeah, they loved it.
Oh,
But, of course, there's always another side.
right. What's the flip side here?
This fueled income inequality.
Made it worse.
Exactly.
So we're starting to see that picture.
A booming economy.
Factories pumping out goods, but
There's more to it.
more to the story.
Way more.
Okay. And you mentioned scandals earlier.
Let's talk Teapot Dome.
Ooh, yes, intrigue.
Total intrigue.
Lay it on me.
So there's this place in Wyoming,
Called Teapot Dome.
Teapot Dome, okay?
It's sitting on this huge oil reserve.
Belonging to the U.S. Navy.
So what happened?
Harding's Secretary of the Interior,
What was his name?
Albert Fall.
Albert Fall. Okay.
He decided to lease these reserves.
To
Private oil
Doesn't
companies.
seem straightforward enough.
There's a catch.
Of course, there's a catch.
What'd he do?
He did it without any competitive bidding.
So no one else had a chance?
Mhm.
And?
He was secretly taking bribes and favors in return.
So he was basically selling off these national resources
Yeah.
for personal gain?
You got it.
Classic corruption?
And then
Right.
the scheme unraveled
Oh,
thanks to a Senate investigation.
they found out.
They did.
And what happened to Fall?
He became the first cabinet member in U.S. history to
To
go to
prison.
prison.
Wow, what a fall from grace.
Yeah, no kidding.
This had to be a blow to public trust.
A huge blow.
The Teapot Dome scandal really tarnished Harding's presidency.
Yeah, it raised all these questions about corruption.
But amidst the scandal...
Harding did have some achievements.
Right, he wasn't all bad. No, not at all.
Like the Budget and Accounting Act?
That act was huge.
It was.
It's hard to believe
Oh,
that
yeah.
before 1921,
Okay.
the government had no centralized way to manage its money.
Wow. Really?
No system.
So what did the act do?
It created the Bureau of the Budget.
Okay.
Basically the system we still use today.
To track spending
Uh-huh.
and make sure things don't get out of control.
Hopefully.
Fingers crossed.
Right.
So a lasting impact.
Big time.
What else did Harding accomplish?
Well, he reduced the national debt
Good.
and federal spending.
Even better.
He appointed Taft, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court,
Okay.
and negotiated the Washington Naval Treaty.
Now, that's the one that aimed to prevent another world war, right?
That's the one.
By limiting those naval arms races.
Exactly.
So a major diplomatic achievement, limiting the size and construction of battleships.
Among the major world powers.
So Harding's legacy,
It's really a mixed bag.
scandals, successes,
And then,
a very sudden end.
yeah, he died unexpectedly in 1923
While
on a speaking tour in San Francisco.
I remember learning about that.
It was a shock.
Weren't there rumors
Oh, tons of rumors.
about his death?
Of poisoning.
Wow.
Even suicide.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Were they ever substantiated?
Never.
So what was the official cause?
A cerebral hemorrhage?
Okay.
But still,
What does it say that those rumors even existed?
it shows the public's unease with his administration.
Right. All the scandals kind of fueled that speculation.
Exactly.
So with Harding gone,
His vice president steps in.
Calvin Coolidge.
Yep.
What a dramatic shift.
It was
Coolidge inherited a nation
grappling with uncertainty,
and a tarnished image.
for sure.
Coolidge was a very different character,
Oh, yeah. Night and day.
known for his quiet demeanor
His belief in limited government.
and his nickname, Silent Towel.
That sums him up pretty well.
So Coolidge believed,
That the government should interfere as little as possible, business and the economy,
which aligned with
the laissez-faire philosophy of the time.
right, individual liberty, minimal government intervention.
Exactly.
So did Coolidge just continue Harding's pro-business policies?
Essentially, yes.
He did.
He further reduced taxes
Okay.
and regulations.
Adding fuel to the fire.
To the economic fire of the Roaring Twenties, yeah.
But were there any other big policies?
Oh, yeah. He also signed the Immigration Act of 1924.
Yes, the Immigration Act of
A
1924.
very controversial one.
It really was.
It introduced quotas based on nationality.
Right, limiting immigration from certain places.
Southern and Eastern Europe and Asia.
It really changed American demographics.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it's impossible to talk about the 1920s
Without considering its impact.
on American culture.
Big impact.
It's important to consider the long-lasting consequences.
Which are still felt today.
So the Coolidge years?
The Roaring Twenties in full swing.
Incredible economic prosperity.
The rise of consumer culture,
Right.
technological advancements, the automobile,
Great.
huge innovations,
Transforming the American landscape.
the way people live their lives.
It was a time of major innovation and cultural dynamism.
It was.
But was this prosperity shared by everyone?
That's the question, isn't it?
Were there any downsides?
To this hands-off approach.
Yeah, was there anyone being left behind?
Well, while businesses thrived,
And urban areas prospered?
the agricultural sector struggled.
Oh, interesting.
Think about it.
Okay.
Overproduction?
Too much stuff.
Yeah. And falling prices.
Hurting the farmers.
Yeah. They were really being plagued by this.
Even while the rest of the economy was booming?
It's ironic. Income inequality.
Right, we talked about that earlier.
It was becoming a major issue.
It was getting worse.
The gap between the wealthy
And everyone else.
was widening.
Significantly.
Yeah.
And then there's all that investing.
Oh, yeah. The speculative investing.
Buying stocks on margin,
Borrowing money to invest.
hoping to get rich quick.
It created this bubble
An illusion of stability.
that couldn't last.
So cracks in the facade of the Roaring Twenties.
Starting to show.
And it seems that Coolidge's approach,
Didn't do much to fix these problems.
right, his
Yeah.
limited government approach.
His policies contributed to the boom.
What?
They failed to address these growing disparities.
Which would have consequences.
Dire consequences.
And I think we all know what's coming.
The Great Depression.
It's
Seeds of that catastrophe.
were sown during the 1920s.
That's right.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
It is.
We often look back at the 1920s.
But this romanticized view.
Yeah, flapper dresses, jazz music.
But
There were these economic tensions
building up
ready to explode.
exactly like a house of cards.
Oh, I like that.
The foundation looked sturdy.
Right, with all that economic growth.
But those cards were precariously balanced.
Propped up by risky investments.
Uh-huh.
And that gap between the rich and everyone else.
Right.
And when those cards came tumbling down,
It was brutal.
the Great Depression devastated millions of Americans.
Businesses went bankrupt.
Unemployment skyrocketed.
It was bad.
And the social safety net.
Which was pretty thin back then.
Couldn't handle it. It was a period of hardship.
And suffering.
Immense suffering.
And it's important to remember that this hardship wasn't distributed equally.
Meaning some were hit harder than others,
Exactly.
like the farmers.
Yeah, we talked about them earlier.
They were already facing difficulties.
Even when the economy seemed to be booming,
And the Depression just amplified those problems.
made them so much worse.
Imagine rural America at this time.
Low crop prices,
Mounting debts,
and then the Dust Bowl,
ravaging the Great Plains.
a perfect storm of challenges,
And then there's racial inequality.
which, as we mentioned, was largely unaddressed.
During the Harding and Coolidge years,
Sadly, that's true.
African Americans continued to face discrimination.
In almost every aspect of life.
Housing, jobs, education.
Yeah, even access to basic services.
They were often the last hired,
And the first fired.
making them even more vulnerable.
The economic downturn
So while some might remember the glitz and glamour,
of the Roaring Twenties,
we have to remember
it was also a time of deep divisions.
and inequality.
Progress was being made.
Uh,
It was a period of stark contrasts,
prosperity for some
alongside persistent poverty.
and discrimination for others.
It's important to remember that.
Okay, let's walk through the events leading up to the crash.
No.
It all starts with speculation in the stock market, right?
Yeah, investors buying stocks on margin,
Basically gambling with borrowed money.
hoping to strike it rich.
Quickly,
A recipe for disaster.
like a casino,
Yeah, where everyone's betting with borrowed chips.
convinced they'll win big,
High stakes.
ignoring the risks.
And then,
Actor.
October 24th, 1929,
The bubble bursts,
stock prices plummet.
triggering panic selling.
It's like everyone at that casino.
Suddenly realizes they can't repay their debts.
And chaos ensues.
What a vivid analogy.
That panic selling,
Led to the stock market crash.
the official start of the Great Depression.
The crash exposed all those weaknesses.
The overinflated stock prices
Right, the risky investments, the widening gap,
between the rich and the poor,
and those policies of the 1920s.
with their emphasis on deregulation.
And limited government intervention.
They played a big role in setting the stage
It's like they removed the safety net.
and didn't realize how high people were climbing.
Right, the lack of oversight.
Allowed for excessive speculation,
And risky financial practices.
fueling the instability.
That led to the crash.
It's incredible to think about.
How policies intended to promote growth
Ultimately contributed to the downturn
to one of the worst economic downturns.
in American history.
It's a stark reminder.
That even well-intentioned policies, unintended consequences,
Especially when they don't address
the underlying imbalances.
social and economic imbalances.
Exactly.
So the Roaring Twenties end,
Not with a bang.
but with a thud.
A deafening thud.
That happens next.
How does the country grapple with this fallout?
That's
For
historic,
another time.
but it's safe to say
That the consequences of this era
will reverberate.
for decades to come.
So where do we go from here?
Well, we've covered a lot.
Harding's call for normalcy.
The excesses of the Roaring Twenties
The devastating crash.
that brought it all to a halt.
We've been piecing together a puzzle.
A complex puzzle.
Each event, each decision,
Interconnected
forming a larger picture.
of this transformative period.
And as we step back,
To admire this puzzle.
I'm starting to see those learning objectives
Yeah.
coming into focus.
But before we move on,
To those,
there's one more crucial aspect.
what's that?
The cultural shifts
Oh, yeah. The social movements.
bubbling beneath the surface.
We can't forget about those.
Absolute not.
After all, the 1920s,
Or just about.
economic booms and busts,
It was a time of profound change.
social and cultural change.
For sure.
It's like this era had a split personality.
That's a great way to put it.
Economic boom on the one hand,
And simmering tensions.
about social norms and values on the other.
It's true.
While we see the carefree flapper,
The rise of jazz music
there was also a pushback,
from those who felt threatened.
threatened by.
These changes.
Right, they felt these changes were a threat to traditional values.
Exactly.
So it wasn't all champagne and parties.
Not exactly. No.
Like prohibitions,
Yes.
which went into effect
In 1920,
and lasted throughout the decade.
it was meant to curb alcohol consumption.
Oh,
It
no.
backfired.
It did.
It led to organized crime.
Hooliganing.
The whole thing.
Like trying to hold back a tidal wave.
Yeah, Prohibition created this underground culture.
Speakeasies everywhere.
Everywhere.
And speaking of cultural clashes.
We can't ignore the Ku Klux Klan.
Oh, wow.
They Klan's membership swelled,
During this time.
fueled by anti-immigrant sentiment,
Racism.
fear of social change.
It's a dark side to the 1920s. We often overlook it.
While some embraced the modern spirit,
Others clung to tradition
and reacted with fear
and hostility,
towards those they perceived as different.
highlighting those complexities of this era
That clash between those embracing change
and those resisting it.
tensions woven into the fabric of the 1920s.
Still resonating today.
Absolutely.
Good reminder
That progress isn't always linear.
there are pushbacks.
Setbacks along the way.
But amidst those tensions,
There were also voices calling for equality,
for social justice,
like the women's suffrage movement.
achieving victory with the 19th Amendment,
In 1920,
granting women the right to vote,
a huge step,
and the Harlem Renaissance.
celebrating African-American culture,
Through music, literature, and art,
a vibrant period.
of creativity and self-expression,
Important to recognize those advancements.
amidst the challenges,
The 1920s,
a melting pot,
of ideas and
a
movements.
period of both progress and regression.
It was.
So let's pull all these threads together. Harding and Coolidge's policies,
The economic boom and bust cycle.
the social and cultural changes
What are the key takeaways?
that still resonate in the 21st century.
Well, one of the most striking lessons,
Mm.
the cyclical nature of economics.
That boom and bust cycle,
The Roaring Twenties
with its rapid growth,
and speculative frenzy
stands as a cautionary tale.
about the dangers of unchecked capitalism.
And the need for regulation.
Thoughtful regulation.
We've seen this pattern repeat itself.
Throughout history,
Periods of exuberance.
followed by painful corrections.
The dot-com bubble,
The housing bubble.
leading up to the 2008 financial crisis.
All examples of this cycle
Understanding this pattern,
can help us make more informed decisions,
both individually,
and as a society,
so learning from the past.
to avoid repeating those mistakes.
What else stands out?
The impact of economic policies.
Han!
All segments of society.
Who benefits?
Who loses out?
The Harding and Coolidge years.
With their focus on tax cuts for the wealthy,
And deregulation.
show how policies can worsen inequality.
We're still grappling with those issues today.
We are.
Rising income inequality.
The concentration of wealth,
Echoes from the 1920s
reverberating, unfettered market.
don't always lead to equitable outcomes.
They don't.
What can we do
How can we apply these insights
to create a more just?
and sustainable economic system?
That's the big question.
A crucial step. Promoting policies
for foster
greater economic inclusion.
assert and opportunity.
Yeah.
Can you give some examples?
Think investing in education,
Job training,
a living wage,
access to affordable healthcare,
affordable housing,
essential pieces.
of a more equitable society,
Creating a system that works for everyone.
not just a privileged few.
That's a powerful takeaway.
It is
Another crucial lesson.
the need for government oversight.
Regulation.
We saw how the lack of regulation
It's 1920s.
contributed to those excesses.
That led to the Depression.
Right.
Finding that balance
Between encouraging innovation,
and growth.
but also protecting consumers,
Workers.
the environment.
It's a delicate balance.
It is.
And as we saw with the Immigration Act,
Policies can have unintended consequences,
social and cultural consequence.
rippling across generations,
Emphasizing the need for thoughtful debate
understanding the potential impact.
before enacting big changes.
Exactly.
So as we wrap up,
This deep dive,
I'm struck by
how much this era still resonates.
the Harding and Coolidge years.
With all its triumphs and tragedies,
It's a testament to the power of history.
by studying the past
We gain insights
to help us navigate the present.
and shape a better future.
That's right.
And the learning doesn't stop here.
There's so much more to uncover.
Different perspectives to consider,
Keep exploring, keep questioning
connecting the dots
between the past and the present,
to make informed decisions.
and create a future we can all be proud of.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Until next time,
Keep learning.
and keep exploring those cracks in the facade of the Roaring Twenties.
Right.
Let's delve a little deeper.
Okay.
How did those prosperous times set the stage for one of the biggest economic downturns?
It's fascinating, isn't it?
It really is.
We often look back at the 1920s with this,
romanticized view,
right, flapper dresses.
jazz music,
But beneath the surface, all those economic tensions
building up.
just ready to explode.
Exactly. A house of cards.
Oh.
The foundation might have looked sturdy.
Yeah, with all that economic growth. But
Those cards were precariously balanced,
Huh.
propped up by risky investments.
The widening gap.
Between the rich and everyone else.
Yeah.
And when those cards finally came tumbling down,
The crash was brutal.
it was.
The Great Depression devastated millions.
Businesses went bankrupt.
Unemployment skyrocketed.
It was bad.
And that social safety net.
which was already pretty thin.
Couldn't handle it.
The sheer number of people needing help. It was a period of immense hardship.
And suffering.
Absolutely.
And it's crucial to remember
What's that?
this hardship.
Yeah.
It wasn't distributed equally.
No, certain groups were hit much harder.
Right, like the farmers.
We talked about them earlier.
They were already facing difficulties.
Even when the rest of the economy seemed to be booming,
Right.
the Depression just amplified those existing problems.
Made them worse.
Way worse.
Imagine rural America during this time.
Farmers were grappling with low crop prices.
Mounting debts.
And then the Dust Bowl
Right.
ravaging the Great Plains.
This is like...
A perfect storm of challenges.
And then on top of that...
There's the issue of racial inequality.
Right, which was largely unaddressed.
During the Harding and Coolidge years,
Sadly true.
African Americans continued to face discrimination.
Yeah, in almost every aspect of life.
Housing, jobs,
Education,
access to basic services,
last hired, first fired.
making them especially vulnerable.
During the downturn. So while some might reminisce about the glitz and glamour,
Of the Roaring Twenties,
it's important to remember
that this era was also a time of deep divisions.
inequalities.
Progress was being made in some areas, in a period of stark contrasts,
Prosperity for some,
and then persistent poverty.
and discrimination for others.
Yeah.
Okay, let's walk through those events leading up to the crash.
Okay.
And all seems to start with
Rampant speculation.
in the stock market.
Investors buying stocks on margin.
Basically,
Gambling with borrowed money.
hoping to strike it rich.
Quickly. A recipe for disaster.
Awesome.
Imagine a casino where
Okay.
everyone's betting,
With borrowed chips.
convinced they'll win big.
And then...
The stakes were high. The risks were often ignored.
And then on Black Thursday,
October 24th, 1929.
the bubble bursts,
Stock prices plummet.
triggering this wave of panic selling.
It's like everyone at that casino suddenly
And
realizes,
can't repay their debts.
and chaos just ensues.
That's a vivid analogy.
That panic selling led to the stock market crash
The official start.
of the Great Depression.
And the crash exposed all those underlying weaknesses.
Yeah, the overinflated stock prices,
Their risky investment.
the gap between the rich and the poor.
And the policies of the 1920s.
Right, with their emphasis on deregulation.
And limited government intervention.
They played a significant role in setting the stage,
It's like they removed the safety net.
without realizing how high people were climbing.
Exactly.
That lack of oversight
Yeah.
allowed for those excessive speculations.
And risky financial practices.
It fueled the instability.
That ultimately led to the crash.
It's incredible how those policies,
Intended to promote economic growth,
yeah,
ultimately contributed to one of the worst downturns
Babe,
in American history.
it's a stark reminder
It is.
that even well-intentioned policies,
Can have unintended consequences.
especially when they
Fail to address those underlying economic imbalances. Exactly. So the Roaring Twenties end not with a bang.
but with a deafening thud.
What happens next?
How does the country begin to grapple with the fallout?
That's a story.
For another time.
It's safe to say.
That the consequences of this era
Both positive and negative.
would reverberate.
For decades to come.
So where do we go from here?
Well, we've covered a lot of ground.
From Harding's call for normalcy
To the excesses of the Roaring Twenties.
and the devastating crash.
That brought it all to a screeching halt.
We've been piecing together this complex puzzle.
It is complex.
Each event, each decision,
All interconnected.
forming this larger picture.
Of this transformative period.
And as we step back,
To admire that puzzle.
I'm already starting to see those learning objectives
That's good.
coming into focus.
But before we move on to those,
Okay.
I think there's one more crucial aspect.
Of this era.
Yeah, that deserves our attention.
What's that?
The cultural shifts.
Oh, right.
Social movements.
That were happening. That were bubbling beneath the surface.
Absolutely. We can't forget about those.
No.
After all, the 1920s weren't just about booms and busts.
It was a time of profound social and cultural change.
The 1920s weren't just about booms and busts.
Right. We were just talking about,
The cultural shifts.
yeah, and social movement.
It's like this era had a split personality.
I like that. Split personality.
Economic boom on one hand,
Mhm.
and these tensions around social norms and values on the other.
It's true. While we see this image of like
Yeah.
the carefree flapper,
The rise of jazz music.
there was a pushback
Oh, yeah.
from those who felt
That these changes were a threat
a threat to their values.
to traditional values.
Exactly.
So it wasn't all champagne and parties.
Exactly.
Like Prohibition,
Oh, prohibition.
which went into effect in 1920 and
Remember-
lasted the whole decade.
intended to curb alcohol consumption.
Yeah.
It really backfired.
How so?
It led to this rise in organized crime.
Like bootlegging.
Yeah, all of that.
It's like trying to hold back a tidal wave.
It really is. Prohibition created this whole underground culture.
Speakeasies popping up.
Everywhere.
Speaking of cultural clashes.
We can't forget about the Ku Klux Klan.
Right.
The Klan's membership really swelled during this era.
Why was that?
It was fueled by that anti-immigrant sentiment.
Racism.
Fear of social change.
It's a dark side of the 1920s.
It is a dark side.
Often overlooked.
Yeah, some embraced the modern spirit of the time.
While others clung to tradition.
Reacting with fear
and hostility.
Towards those they saw as different.
This highlights those complexities.
Of the era.
The clash.
Between those embracing change and those resisting it.
And these tensions.
Were woven into the fabric of the 1920s.
And they still resonate today.
They do.
It's a good reminder.
That societal progress
isn't always linear.
No, there are pushbacks.
And setbacks along the way.
For sure.
But even amidst those tensions.
There were voices calling for equality.
And social justice.
Like the women's suffrage movement.
Right.
They achieved a major victory. The passage of the 19th Amendment.
In 1920.
Granting women the right to vote.
That's right. A huge step.
It was.
And we can't forget about
the Harlem Renaissance.
That was in full swing.
Celebrating African-American culture.
Through art.
Music, literature.
Right, this vibrant period.
Of creativity and self-expression.
It's important to recognize those advancements.
Yeah, amidst all the challenges.
The 1920s were this melting pot.
Of ideas and movement.
A period of progress and regression.
Yeah, it was both.
So as we wrap up our deep dive today.
Into the Harding and Coolidge years.
We've talked about their policies. The economic boom and bust.
The social and cultural changes.
What are some key takeaways
that resonate in the 21st century?
What can we learn from all this?
One of the biggest lessons
is
the cyclical nature of economics.
That boom and bust cycle.
The Roaring Twenties is a cautionary tale.
In what way?
About the dangers of unchecked capitalism.
And the need for regulation.
Thoughtful regulation.
We've seen this pattern repeat throughout history.
Right. Periods of growth followed by correction.
Like the dot-com bubble?
Yeah. And the housing bubble?
Leading up to 2008.
It's a cycle.
Understanding this pattern
can help us make better decisions.
As individuals?
And as a society.
So learning from the past.
To avoid repeating those same mistakes.
What else stands out to you?
Well, it's important to consider the impact economic policies.
On everyone.
Right. Who benefits and who loses out.
The Harding and Coolidge years.
Their focus on tax cuts for the wealthy.
And deregulation.
Show how policies can worsen inequality.
And we're still dealing with that today.
Yeah. Rising inequality, concentration of wealth.
It's like those echoes from the 1920s.
Are still reverberating.
They really are. Unfettered markets.
Don't always lead to the best outcomes.
So what can we do?
How do we apply these insights?
To create a more just system.
A more sustainable economic system.
That's the big question.
A crucial step is promoting policies.
That do what?
That foster greater inclusion
and opportunity
for everyone.
Can you give us some examples?
Investing in education.
Job training.
Ensuring a living wage.
Access to health care.
And affordable housing.
Creating a system that works for everyone.
Not just a select few.
That's a powerful takeaway.
It is, and we also need to remember
the
need for government oversight.
Regulation.
We saw how the lack of it in the 1920s
contributed to the excesses
that led to the Depression.
Right, finding that balance.
Between encouraging innovation,
growth,
but also protecting consumers and workers.
And the environment.
It's a delicate balance.
It is, and the Immigration Act shows how policies can have these unintended consequences.
Social and cultural.
That ripple through time.
We need to think carefully.
Before enacting big changes.
Understand the potential impacts.
So as we wrap up
our deep dive into the Harding and Coolidge years,
I'm struck by how much this era still resonates.
It's a testament to the power of history.
By studying the past,
we gain insights
to help us navigate the present
and shape a better future.
And the learning doesn't stop here.
Keep exploring, keep questioning,
keep connecting the dots
between the past and the present.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Until next time,
keep learning and keep exploring.